Thank you for joining us here for this much anticipated panel. I've been really looking forward to this discussion. We're here to talk about the intersection of enhancing physical activity through fitness gaming. And what I really love about this panel is we have a variety of panelists who are working on fitness gaming from one perspective or another. So with that in mind, why don't we start with you, Ianthe? Would you and then the rest of the panelists please introduce yourselves and then maybe spend a minute talking about what your approach has been and your involvement has been with fitness gaming, and then we'll kick off the discussion.
Okay. Hi, my name's Ianthe. I am the head of fitness for FitXR, which is a company based in London that we create virtual reality fitness games. At the moment, our one on the market is called BoxVR. And my involvement has been to come at it from a fitness perspective. So working out how to create the experience and make it as authentic as possible to an actual group fitness class, and to keep it in the realm of fitness so it doesn't become too much of a game. So I basically help toe the line, basically, with the developers.
My name is Stanton. I do a lot of things in the VR industry. I'm an investor and entrepreneur. My first company was sold to Apple about 2014, and then since then I've been very, very active as what I call a professional VR enthusiast, which means that my job is I go around and connect with a lot of entrepreneurs, people working in VR, and mentor and invest in them. I'm also the director of the VR Health Institute out of San Francisco State University. We're in collaboration with San Francisco State University. What we do is we rate VR and AR games for their calorie consumption. We bring in subjects to the lab, connect them to metabolic equipment, and then have them play different VR games for rating if they're equivalent of like running or jogging or treadmills or whatever. Also the director, executive producer of a game called Quiver, and I'm involved in a number of venture capital groups that invest in the Bay Area.
Cool, hi, my name is Jamie Rosen. I'm the founder and CEO of Way Better, which is a company walking distance from here. We have a number of games that make it fun to improve health-related behavior. So games to lose weight, games to exercise more, games to sit less and be more active. Working on a new game right now to quit smoking. And the games basically all have a few things in common. One is it's social. It's a social game that you do with a bunch of other people. The other is that you have to bet on yourself. So there's an element of behavioral economics where you have to put some money down, and then if you don't complete the challenge, you lose it. But if you do complete the challenge, you're considered a winner at the end, and you split the pot with all the other winners. So you actually get your money back, usually plus a nice little profit. And we've had about 800,000 people who've played, and we've actually paid out at this point a little more than $60 million to the winners of our games.
That's great. So Ianthe, FitXR, London-based company, you have really made a huge impact in the VR space with BoxVR. So I don't know how many people have heard of BoxVR here. Would you mind sort of giving the audience sort of a brief overview of what BoxVR is and and how you as an expert with fitness and how game designers sort of work together? Just give an overview of the product and some of what you did to approach BoxVR.
Yeah. So when you're in the virtual reality world, the game is such that you have different targets flying towards you, and different targets mean different punches, they mean squats, dodges, slips, all the different moves that you'll have when you're training and boxing. So the developers came up with the idea to create a group fitness scenario in VR. They approached me and some of my colleagues, and we took classes that we normally teach in the boxing fitness world, and we were trying to work out how we can bring them into the fitness world, knowing that we had some difficulties in the sense that you can't see the people that are doing it. So we had to work with them to create cues and movement that wouldn't create injuries, if that makes sense. Like if the way that we created the cues for squats are such that you have to duck, and the normal human movement is to duck. If you're in a class and you tell someone to squat, they might do that weirdly and do something weird with their knees. So we really worked closely with them to make sure that the cues were making people do things that felt more normal in natural movement than forced, awkward, injury-prone movement.
Okay. and Aaron. So the first time I saw Aaron was on CNN. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was probably just getting ready to go to the gym. Let's just go with that story. And I had CNN on, and I heard somebody talking about fitness and VR experiences, and it was Aaron, and I was already curating content for this track, so I reached out to him immediately. And you know, you've done something really innovative. One of the many things you've done is you were inspired to create a VR health rating system.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you please describe what that is and sort of some of the thinking that went into that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, like, one of the reasons I like programs like Games for Change is because it forces people to look at something that's historically been considered for fun as a way of changing our lives. And gaming and exercise is interesting in this field because we've spent 30 years telling people that exercise and gaming are opposites of each other. That you know, the stereotype is if you want to, you know, be fat and lazy, sit in your basement and play World of Warcraft, and you know, it's on South Park, right? So as a consequence, we're moving to this kind of area now where VR and augmented reality is a gaming platform that is inherently mobile. Like most of the games you play have some degree of mobility to it, certainly much more so than classic platforming. And so, but there's now a lot of resistance. There's a lot of societal resistance to the idea that you can be fit through games. And so what the VR Health Institute, technically the VR Institute of Health and Exercise, what we put together was a ratings platform similar to the ESRB, or PEGI, which is, except for we try to look at these games and in a controlled setting measure their calorie consumption and translate that into a rating that people can understand. So is this a resting equivalent? Is this a walking equivalent? Is it a treadmill equivalent or a sprinting equivalent? And so what we do is we bring people into the lab, we have metabolic equipment, which we measure their calorie consumption, and then compare it to known calorie consumption of other more typical exercises, and then rate them. The idea being that if you ever, for every VR game you see it's a resting equivalent, means that somewhere out there is a game like Box VR, for example, that is a much more intense game, and we're trying to raise awareness of that.
That's great. And Jamie, so you know, the way I discovered about you is I kept hearing when I was looking for folks for this panel about this you know, step bet. You've got to try step bet, and I know you have a series of other products that also use gamification mechanisms for improved healthy behaviors. But the whole idea of betting against oneself is really novel and innovative in this context. Could you please share with everyone here a little bit more about how that mechanic works and how you became inspired to pursue that?
Sure. So I guess one of the things, well, I guess maybe I can start by saying how I got inspired to do this. So I visited some friends at a company I used to work at who were doing one of these games. They had set up, in this case, a weight loss game. It was sort of like it was a bunch of years ago when The Biggest Loser was a popular show, and they called it The Biggest Loser at Work competition, and they just had sort of improvised their own version of this where people, they bet money and they had certain goals. And one of the things, I used to be a toy inventor, one of the things I immediately noticed is that these people were laughing their way through an experience, and normally you just don't laugh your way through. Losing weight is the kind of thing you do by yourself. It's usually not considered fun. And here they were not just laughing their way through it, but they were actually, it was an office on the west side near the Hudson River. They were going running during their lunch hour along the river. They were eating healthy, and they were also playing with each other. They were doing funny things and trying to sabotage each other. Every time someone would come back from a meeting, someone would have left a fancy chocolate bar in their chair. And the whole thing sort of lit up the office, and the sort of inventor in me thought, you know, how could you somehow bottle this up and productize it? And one of the things I noticed as I thought about that is a lot of these people who had already invented this behavior, I didn't come up with it, just sort of copying it, would set it up to be sort of a winner-take-all type of thing, where the person who loses the most or walks the most, or you'd come up with these games now with walking that are 10,000 steps per day, these are your challenges, or who takes the most steps. And that's one of the things that we figured out very early on that's become really an important part of our whole philosophy, is that the games really are all about betting against yourself. So it's, can I lose the weight? It's me against the scale, but I'm doing it with other people. So I'm on this journey together with a whole bunch of other people. In the game, in the version of Step Bet, that you brought up, what we try to do is make it super personalized. So everyone has their own step goals that are based on your history of walking. So if we can't pull your step history from some tracker or other, whether it's a Fitbit or Garmin or your Apple Watch, you can't actually even play in the game. We need a certain amount of history. And based on that history, we come up with specific goals that are targeted for you. And it's a 6-day-a-week game. You get 1 day off. It lasts typically 6 weeks. And every day you have specific goals to nudge you to walk a little bit more than you're used to, and twice a week a lot more than you're used to. So go for a run, or do something, go play Box VR, or do something special that's going to get you an extra number of steps. And what we found is that the most interesting thing, I think, from my perspective, is that the dynamics have been such that you're competing against yourself, but you become friendly with these other people. It's not a competitive vibe, it's much more of a collaborative vibe. It's almost like an untimed fun run where everyone's kind of rooting for everyone to finish. You don't feel like if someone is out in front that you want to kind of sabotage them. You actually want to see them succeed. And so the social component to this is actually the most powerful part of it. If you asked our winners, what was it that really worked for you? What made it sustainable over the long run? It was that they met other people, typically people they don't know in the real world. In fact, almost better that when you meet people that you don't know, because it's liberating. You can be more open and it's honest with them, and people will share in our sort of Facebook group sort of style. It's not actually Facebook group, it's in our app. But they'll share things with each other that they say we wouldn't ever even share with our closest friends or our spouses. And so it becomes almost like a little bit of an AA meeting where everyone's kind of talking about these things and feeling very much sort of supported by the other people in the group. So one of the most surprising things was how much of a collaborative experience it was, and it's not really a game to compete against other people.
Yeah, and I think that's super compelling, the whole community aspect. And I just want to mention to the panelists, don't feel like you can't break in, or if you have anything to add or follow-up questions.
We're all pretty vocal.
Okay, yeah. I know. They were like, don't worry, we have plenty to say. And so, Ianthe, another thing I think that you, Box VR has in common with the apps that Jamie is making it way better is that you also have a multiplayer component for Box VR. And I find that, again, as somebody who's made games and has made single-player and multiplayer games, I find the multiplayer component incredibly compelling. Can you tell me, or can you share with us either emergent practices or interactions that you've discovered because of the multiplayer, or can you, talk about more how that multiplayer works in the game?
Yeah, well, the reason we came up with it was mainly for the same reason that you've got the whole community building thing, is that we found that people either like to work out with other people completely alone, or set themselves targets, or have that leaderboard. Because in Box VR there's still gamification elements, so you have your scoreboard, all the different stats, calories burnt, and those things like that. And we found that people are starting to develop more of a community in the VR world. So by having the leaderboard, having the multiplayer game, people will meet in a lobby in their virtual reality world, and then play against each other, and you'll be able to see each other's scores as you're playing. So that in itself helps the competitive nature of people if they like to compete against other people, or you can just beat yourself.
Yeah, if I can jump in there, one of the things that studies have shown that's very interesting to me is there's the concept of video game addiction. And video game addiction is actually a lot more rare than people realize. It's very uncommon for somebody to go play Zelda in their basement, a single-player game. Where video game addiction tends to come into play is when somebody is playing an online game and has replaced the social connections that normally come from the real life with the social connections you find in the game, so World of Warcraft and things like this. Most of the time, the vast majority of the time when people talk about video game addiction, they actually are talking about internet addiction. And the idea there is that the social connection can be a huge motivator in how we engage with the world. We talk about exercise as a social versus singular thing. I think if you don't look to tap into the social component around exercise, you're missing a huge component of what is important.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And yet, I think maybe you may or may not agree. I think with all of our various conversations, at one point or another, it's come up that being physically active in these contexts it removes some of the embarrassment potentially, or of like maybe going to a gym and sort of if you feel like you're making a fool of yourself and there are mirrors everywhere. Does anyone want to speak to that?
I would say that I can't imagine anything more foolish looking than putting myself in VR and exercising. I think it's the exact opposite, to be honest with you. But I think that there's going to be a period of time where the social perspective of gamers is very similar to that of athletes, where we'll get to the point where that's just kind of, possibly I think it's going to really kind of hit an impasse with the augmented reality stuff as well, as the equipment becomes smaller and lighter and easier to use, a little less goofy looking. There's a company called Black Box VR whose entire premise, if I remember correctly, was built around the concept that you could go into kind of your own enclosed space, a black box, you exercise in private, and you can come out afterwards without feeling like you're being exposed. But also, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, but I actually think that of VR primarily as an at-home exercise equipment first.
Yeah.
There's been definitely some experimentations we've done with some gyms to see how non-VR people interact with it. But I think that what we overlook is that VR, in my perspective, is the most versatile home-based exercise equipment money can buy. And then you're a little less worried about being exposed in your living room, I think.
One of the things that we found interesting when we were testing a new game we haven't actually launched yet called Sweat Bet. The idea of that game is you have to do home-based exercises, body weight exercises like sit-ups and push-ups and burpees and things like that. You do them from your house and you make a time-lapse video of yourself doing the exercises, because in our games, because people are betting on themselves, we have to have some way, and users care about having some way that there's verification that people are actually doing this, because you can't have games with money on the line among strangers unless there's some sort of verification. And so we thought about it for a while, how do we verify that someone's doing these exercises? And we decided to test this out where people just prop up their phone, they set it on themselves, and they do these specified exercises that we give them each day of the game. And we said to them, listen, we're running this game as a test inside of a private Facebook group. You can either submit these videos to the group and post them for everyone else to see, and there's maybe 300 people in the game, or you can send them to us and we'll have our referees, we have a whole team of people that we call referees, review these videos and validate that you did it for today's date. We'll give you a checkbox. And we had a few % of the people say, I'm not comfortable sharing that. These are videos of me in my house, and I'm not comfortable with how I look. I'm doing these exercises, and I'm all sweaty. And what's interesting is when we posted the game and everyone could see everyone else doing this, again, remember, these are people who don't know each other in the real world, so they don't feel the same set of embarrassment that you'd feel if you had showed these videos to your coworkers or to your next door neighbors. So they're just posting it to people they're never going to meet. And they realize that everyone looks kind of the same. No one's looking like they should be in a workout video as a celebrity trainer. They're all just kind of normal people just trying to do 15 minutes of sweaty exercises. And it turns out all the people who said, I'd like to have those videos privately reviewed, came back and said, I'm cool with it. We can just post them to the game. I don't mind sharing those videos. And to be honest, I think one of the appeals of that game was they felt that they were not in a black box. So they felt that they were actually in a club of other people who could identify with them, and then they would post things like, you'd see funny things in the video, like their kids running back and forth in the background, or their dogs jumping on top of them, and everyone was like laughing their way through the humanity of the whole experience. And I think it scratched that same itch you're talking about of giving people a sense of belonging, that at the end of the day is what people are craving, and if you can do that and make it healthy at the same time, that's an awesome combination.
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think on the other side of it, because obviously in VR you're very much insular, unless you're in the multiplayer game. What we found is that because people can't see themselves and they can't compare themselves to other people, they end up working out much longer, playing the game, and for much longer, and that's when their fitness goals start to get met. But I think it's there's obviously merit in both, because one, you just don't really want to see other people, and the other, everyone's sharing. And everyone's looking maybe a little bit crazy together. So yeah.
That is really an interesting difference. And one common theme that I've heard from a lot of people that I've spoken with here and elsewhere is when you're participating in a physical activity using these through these experiences, the time seems to sort of go by quickly. It doesn't feel like a chore. In fact, I remember you, Aaron, saying you played one of your favorite, was it a VR game for 150 hours?
Yeah, so one of the very first,
Exercise game?
Well, no, it wasn't. It was Audio Shield, actually. But it was a highly mobile game, right? So Audio Shield is a music rhythm game that came prior to Beat Saber making that a huge thing. And yeah, Steam VR tracks how many hours you spend playing games, which is not normally something you brag about, right? Last time I don't go on first dates and be like, yeah, I spent 150 hours playing over the summer playing a video game. Except that in the particular case, I was watching 150 hours is how much I had played Audio Shield, and I realized, if that is in fact exercise, and it felt like exercise to me, then my VR unit was by far the most effective exercise equipment I'd ever owned, right? Because I'd never spent 150 hours on my treadmill or my elliptical or my rowing machine, the three other things I own, even cumulatively by a long shot, right? I mean, one of the things that people, I think, to me, what is interesting about VR and AR and exercise is not fun exercise. It is diverse exercise. Like all exercise equipment has a K rate, right? You start off buying your treadmill, you use it a lot the first week, use it a little less the second, a little less the third, and eventually you're at zero. But people forget sometimes that, like my PS4 has a decay rate as well, right? I bought my PS4, I played 60, 100 hours of my first launch title games, and then I have not touched them for years, right? I bought other games and I play those. And so the idea, if you just take games and combine them with exercise, you can solve the problem indefinitely that the exercise is now fun, I think is not the point. The point is that for $20 or $30, I can refresh my exercise equipment every month. And that VR and AR is one of the very first generations of technology that can do that, exercise equipment that can do that. So yeah, it's that diversity of content, the ability to kind of refresh. It's not about trying to reproduce existing exercise in a virtual world. It's about trying to give exercise that's not possible in the real world.
Jamie, one of the things I really like about, one of the many things I really like about what you're doing is that you integrate with all of these fitness APIs. So, I have a Fitbit, I have my Samsung S Health, who knows what else I have or stopped using. I am actually a lapsed Fitbit user myself, by the way. I use Samsung now. But can you please talk about the various APIs you plug into, and do you feel that there are differences in terms of the calculation, or were there any kind of interesting differences around working with the APIs, around accuracy and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing we try to do is remove all the friction like any company would try to do. And so we don't say you have to have a Fitbit or you have to have a Garmin watch, you have to have this particular app. And so we try to support whatever you're already doing or whatever you already own to track your steps or your runs or whatever it is you're doing. I mean, I guess people like that. A lot of times I think one of the limitations of these device companies is that you tend to be in games with other people who have a Fitbit or other people who have an S Health tracker. And so what you really want to do is be in a game with everyone in your office, and they all have different devices, so you can't end up even going cross, platform with that. So we bridge those platforms. And one interesting thing we noticed when we launched StepBet, as I mentioned, we have to pull your step history in order for you to play. A lot of times when people will say, well, I don't really have a wearable right now, so I'll just use the steps that my iPhone has been tracking. A lot of people don't know this, but when you buy a new iPhone, it's automatically turned on to start tracking your steps. And so a lot of times women would come in and they'd say, okay, pull my Apple Health step tracking from my phone, which sits in their purse a lot of the time. And they suddenly end up in this game, and they're like, okay, I've got to walk this many steps. I'm going to carry my phone with me everywhere I go instead of just leaving it in the purse. And so they blow out their first game steps goals, or they get a wearable at some point because they're excited about the game and they want to do this over and over, and suddenly it just becomes really easy. So what we have to figure out is how do we adapt to the changes over time. So depending on your device, it's not that it's not accurate, because it's all we care about again is you against your past and you and sort of against your future. So whether it's counting every other step or not, it doesn't really matter as long as it's consistent for you. But it does. We do have issues when you change tracker, or if you suddenly change your behavior, not because you're walking more, but just because you're carrying your phone more. But that's a problem that we've been able to resolve, usually after the first game.
Do you mind if I jump on that?
No.
There's something that's really interesting that you just brought up that I think is, so my interest is actually not just in the VR exercise side, it's the data side of things. My background is in machine learning and AI, and I think that the other part that's really interesting about the new generation of exercise tools, be it VR, XR, mobile devices, is it's the first generation of tools where the computer knowing your targets is meaningful. Like my treadmill could probably know that I'm trying to get to 160 beats per minute, my heart rate, and that I'm currently at 120. I could do that years ago, but its ability to respond to that information has been very limited, right? With VR, XR, what you're starting to see is the first generation of tools where the game, knowing that I'm trying to hit that target, can on the fly change the environment around me so that monsters become more aggressive or they back off if your heart rate's too high and needs to come down. The ability to have a virtual AI system that walks somebody through their targets painlessly without them being aware of it is a huge part of what I think the next generation of exercise and technology is all about. You're seeing this right now in kind of the next generation of fitness, but mostly around things like coaching. Like I have the phone in my pocket and I run and it's coaching me the right rhythm. The idea that for the first time you can dynamically change the experience on the fly, like this is going to be what I think we talk about in exercise in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so Ianthe, I'm trying to figure out whether I should ask one question. All right, let me ask this one. Something I thought was really interesting when we spoke the other day on the phone was the fact that you synchronized the audio soundtrack, a really dynamic audio soundtrack with the gameplay. Can you please describe why you prioritize that within the Box VR experience and sort of what behaviors you found around that?
Yeah, so it's mainly because when you want to work intensely, if the music is just like a big lull and relaxed, we notice that people aren't going to react to that. You're not going to get excited, you're not going to want to give 150% if there's nothing else telling you to do that. And obviously because in the VR world everything's super immersive, we made sure whenever we created the workouts that it is all in sync with the music. So we were really careful in making sure that the playlists were diverse, so that if someone likes hip hop, you've got that. If someone likes metal, you might have a little bit of metal in there as well, so that everything appeals to everyone. But also when the music builds, the workout builds. When the music is slowing down, that's when you get your rests. Because it just, when in the early beta testing phases, we were trying to add in more gamification and make it more of a game. All the feedback was that people wanted it to be more like a fitness class and more like a fitness experience.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of when a game of so-called gamification really is causes friction between the experience and the user. So that's pretty interesting. And so what I think, one of the things I think that's interesting that you've been talking about, Aaron, is that when you came up with this VR fitness rating system, it's to help the people distinguish. So it's not necessarily about fitness games per se, but any kind of workout one can get through playing a game. Could you talk about more how you came up with the measurements for determining how intense a physical activity is for a game, especially one like Beat Saber, which was not out the gate meant to be a fitness game?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so one of the common ways that you measure the calorie cost, basically, of an unknown exercise is through what's called a metabolic cart. You measure the rate of oxygen, it's the ratio of oxygen to carbon dioxide on the inhale, and then again on the exhale, because when your body expends a calorie of energy, what it's basically doing is on that conversion from oxygen to CO2. And so by measuring that change of ratio, you can indirectly calculate the amount of calories that were consumed during that breath. And so these metabolic carts, they normally run between about $75,000 to $150,000. And so most of the time they're owned by research institutions, universities. And so if you ever have seen, like in a post-apocalyptic movie or somebody on a treadmill wearing a gas mask or what looks like an oxygen mask, that's probably doing what's called a VO2 max test, which is that equipment. And so by collecting that information, you can rate the exercise on what's called a metabolic score, MET score. And the government, as well as a bunch of other institutions, maintain MET scores for almost every activity you could possibly imagine, from doing dishes to vacuuming to exercises to everything. And so all we basically do is we bring people into a controlled environment. We have them play different VR games, wearing the metabolic equipment, calculate its MET score, and then we compare it to that universal list and say, this game falls in the range that is the equivalent of tennis. Beat Saber, for example, has a metabolic equivalent of playing singles tennis in terms of calorie consumption. Partly because people dramatically overestimate how many calories you spend playing tennis, because you spend a lot of downtime in tennis. And also partly because people underestimate how much more calories you burn if you take out the downtime on a regular activity. Like, so Beat Saber, if you play song to song to song, at the higher difficulty levels, you're playing pretty constantly. And put those things together and you end up generating quite a bit of energy.
And again, forgive me if you are already know this. Are people familiar with Beat Saber as a game, the VR game? Do you want to just quickly just? Oh
yeah, it's a music rhythm game, right? So you have two swords, essentially lightsabers, and as music plays, these blocks fly at you, and you have to slice them in certain directions. In a lot of ways, it's similar to the way the Box VR works. And by the way, I want to just call out a kudos to Box VR. You guys just released on the PS VR, right?
Yeah.
So that's a pretty big mark of honor, I think. And there's not that many games that are making the transition to PSVR, and I think they're doing pretty well as far as what I've heard.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Which is great.
Yeah. No. Did you want to?
Just we've had really great feedback in the first 2 weeks, and just made a ridiculous amount of profit that we weren't expecting, which is really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And now that Quest is coming out, it's making it much easier as well.
Certainly makes me happy because like the entire purpose of, I'm an ecosystem person, and what I believe is in order for the vertical of exercise and VR to take off, we need a more secure ecosystem, foundational ecosystem for as more people come into the market. And so every single time I hear a game like Box VR do well, it makes me very happy. So.
And Jamie, you know, when we spoke, because I was like, Jamie, I really want you, please come on this panel. One of the things that I really value with what you're doing at Way Better is you are focused on mobile devices as sort of a way to reach millions of people. It's like, you know, so many of us have smartphones. Do you want to or plan to deploy to other platforms? I mean, just the fact that you've made such an inroad, not even inroad, you have such a successful mobile says so much for what you've done, because mobile is such a red ocean, as we know. Are you thinking of sticking with mobile, which is fine, I think it's great because it's working, or do you have plans to go to other platforms or thoughts around that?
Yeah, being at this conference is a little bit of a strange thing because we do make games for sure. We talk about that all the time, but we don't think of ourselves as being like what you guys do in terms of making games. Like for us, the game is to actually put down all your devices and go for a run at Central Park, or to not eat the ice cream cone that you're thinking about eating, or to stop smoking. So our games are really, truly just like real life games. Our goal is not to get you, we don't run an advertising-based model. The goal is not to have you spend a lot of time in front of the screen interacting with the game, and that's totally awesome. Like if you want to look at it and interact with other people, that's great. Again, the sort of like social part is inspiring and can be really helpful to getting across the journey. But the goal itself is it's device agnostic, and to be honest, one of the games I'm looking forward to, I have 3 kids, is a game to not use your device, actually.
Yeah.
Put away your phone for hours every day and see if you can stick to that for a certain amount of time.
I'm a fan of I call them real world games, which is ironic, but I am a huge fan. And I think another thing that I found remarkable when I tried out StepBet was, and researched it some more, is that the average bet is $40, right? Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a significant, you know, considering so many people won't even pay 99 cents to download a premium mobile game, the fact that they're going to put $40 on the line, and then I guess the way that works is if whoever makes their goals, they split what's left. Is that right?
Right. So there's a no-lose guarantee. So you're betting the money. It serves as an incentive. Loss aversion kicks in. If you complete the challenge, you're guaranteed to get that back. Even if everyone in the game wins, we'll forfeit our cut, which is how we make money. But in general, the way it ends up working is in a game like that, someone will bet $40. They have 6 weeks to walk a certain number of steps. If they do all the steps, each week there's an elimination round. If you didn't do your 6 days, you're out. You can then now join another game if you want. But at the end of that 6 weeks, we see in step bet 60 to 70% of people typically will reach the goal and they'll get back 10 to 20%, or maybe slightly higher depending on the number of winners, on top of what they originally bet. But they get all their money back guaranteed, and then they'll oftentimes get back, maybe another $8 or $10 on top of that.
That's really remarkable.
It's something that's interesting about that. So in kinesiology, one of the common things that's been shown in studies is that rewards are very ineffective at predicting successful completion of the goal. So if you have promised somebody like a reward, a financial reward at the end of an exercise, and you try to use that as a predictor statistically of whether or not they're going to do the exercise, it's very bad at it. What's the best predictor is if they actually enjoy the thing that they're doing. Like if they enjoy running, that's a really good predictor of whether they're going to run in the future. So it's like offering candy at the end does not increase exercise completion, but if the exercise is the candy, it does. And then I was thinking about this, I wonder how much the social component of it, the fact that you said that people are posting things, that they're actually enjoying the experience of it, that really the betting mechanism, the way to get people bought into it, but what's really keeping them is that component of connecting into the social layer, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, we haven't announced this yet, but we just got an NIH research grant to do a study for QuitBet, which is a game where you have to breathe into a tube. It's a piece of hardware that costs about $50, and it measures the carbon monoxide in your breath, and it knows if you've been smoking cigarettes in the past 24 hours. And one of the main thrusts of that research grant that we got is to test a version with and without the social piece to see how much it's helpful to have other people who are complaining about their cravings and struggling to get through the early days, particularly early days in case of smoking cessation are the hardest. And so we're studying that actually right now.
I'd be really interested to see how it comes out actually.
That's really cool. And I'm going to keep asking questions, but I want to see if anyone in the audience has any questions, or if you don't now, I'll be asking if you do. Oh, okay.
I just had a question about sort of like proper form and VR and also the head-mounted display. How do you navigate design-wise in terms of sort of ensuring users don't get injured using your app or using your experience, and also so that your caloric count. How do you ensure that their exercise results in a proper exercise as opposed to just the risk of something like that, right? I'm curious to hear.
Calorie count.
Sure. Well, I'll touch a little bit on two things. One is my primary focus in terms of discomfort around VR and exercise tasks tends to be with nausea. In which case, then what we have found is that nausea is almost a non-existent thing as long as it's a one-to-one movement. So it's box VR is a great one because you move a foot to the left, your in-game character moves a foot to the left. You put somebody on a bike, it becomes a lot more challenging. And nausea for me is very, very interesting because if somebody experiences nausea while they're exercising, it ruins the rest of the workout. They will never touch it again. Yeah. There's a gym that we were working with where we had a person, she was working out in VR regularly for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then she tried a Verzoom bike, and she put that unit on for about 4 seconds and immediately took it off, felt extremely nauseous, and never came back to VR ever again. So that one negative experience wiped out any of her interest in the entire genre of the tool, which is unfortunate, I think. As for accuracy and calorie counting, there's a lot of different. That's not a problem with just VR and XR, right? Like any of the calorie counters, Fitbits and stuff like that are really across the board very difficult to be accurate with. For example, Box VR is working with the Institute to create custom formulas for predicting calorie consumption by movements, right? So I think there's a lot of interest in our part and on their part to make sure that those calorie estimates are accurate. I think there are some other platforms out there that are not nearly as accurate, in fact, wildly inaccurate. Part of the problem comes from the fact that there's just so much diversity, like in terms of age, in terms of physical fitness, in terms of like, is it the upper body versus the lower body? That's the primary point of activation in the muscles. So it's a longer conversation in that case.
And then in terms of form, that's something that I really struggled with when I came on board, because for me as a fitness instructor and a dancer and choreographer, I care about form, and that's the most important thing. So we have been working with different tutorials. We tried it out, basically got a big spectrum of people that have exercised, never exercised, different ages, to play the game, and then I would watch and study how they moved. And based on that, I worked with the developers to try and create the targets in a way that it became, like I said earlier, more natural movement. So your instinct if something flies at you is to duck, and you're not necessarily going to like duck and throw yourself forwards, because then that will throw you onto your face. So that's it. And at the moment we're working on tutorials, like you said, with different, instead of just having cues, having an actual instructor there to talk and coach you through it, and also with that instructor having a different way to follow the instructor, so you can physically work with your body. Although you can't necessarily like see and trace what people are doing, we've actually been able to find that by just seeing what the head is doing and tracking your hands, you can still really trace what the body's doing.
One more thing on top of that too, which is that if you're interested in that sort of stuff, the VR Institute exists for the purpose of giving feedback and information. So like, if that's something you're interested in, we're happy to look at early builds of games and either benchmark them in advance so that you kind of know where you stand in terms of exercise, but also any lessons that we've learned working with different publishers on how to handle some of that sort of stuff. Things like, and not just the software design side of things, like part of the working with the gyms was figuring out how to deal with sweat, for example, in a physical space. Wear bandanas so your sweat doesn't soak into the straps, right? So feel free to reach out to me if you want. If that's a space you're interested in.
Awesome, thanks.
Does anyone else have any? Gentleman there.
I'm curious from way better perspective. You're talking about, and you were talking about real world games. I like to call it ultimate reality, kind of like how do you make it so that your phone is just a controller for the real world? How do people? I feel like all the interest though is in XR, VR, overlays, intense graphics. How do you sell that innovation to people, and is there kind of how do you approach that kind of where people aren't really thinking about that as like part of this conversation?
I mean, I guess we don't try to sell to the vanguard of tech users. Our users are normal people. People all over the world, but mostly in the US, in the middle of the country. A lot of them are moms just trying to find time to exercise and eat better and things like that. Our users are not the ones who are saying, "Can we please get the newest PS VR app so that we can play it on this cool device that we just bought?" That's just not our user base. So fortunately, everyone has a phone these days. All of our users have phones. And if you can make it so that this game is super accessible, that's the thing that they really want. It's take away any requirements to buy hardware, take away any sort of issues that are difficult or new to learn. Like we use a grammar that's just Facebook private groups in our own apps, so everyone understands exactly how to interact with it. And we try to make it as cut into the slipstream of people's lives as much as possible, so that they can do the thing they really want to do, which is improve their health.
And you had your hand up too?
Yeah, you guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but I remember earlier, yesterday, started part together the days. Someone mentioned in their lecture that people in VR exercises, because of the disassociation with the body, kind of when they go further or harder, they actually work out more efficiently in the VR experience. Have you noticed that, like further, or also do you maybe see people being able to do stuff in VR that they couldn't do in real life just because their mind and body's kind of like their limitations or affecting them, where VR it's not? Have you noticed that at all?
Not so much the second one, but the first one for sure. So one of the very first published studies that was put out by one of the graduate students at San Francisco State University looked at 40 participants, 20 male, 20 female, predominantly kinesiology students. So these are people who are very fit in general. And they had them come in the day beforehand and do a traditional VO2 max test, which basically means that you hook up to the equipment and you run them to the point where their body is not capable of converting oxygen fast enough to keep up with it, right? So you're minutes away from collapse at that point. And during that, we had them answer what's called a Borg scale, on a scale of, I think it's 1 through 20, like your perception of exertion, like how much work you think you're doing. And then with 20 being the point is when you're in the test. And then a few days later, we had those same subjects come back in and play 3 different games, Hollow Point, Audio Shield on modified settings, and Thrill to Fight, a boxing game. And 2 things came out of that was very interesting. One is that at some point in time, almost every single participant reached the theoretical max. Like almost every one of them reached a point where they were no longer able to convert oxygen fast enough. Second thing is when you ask them on the same Borg scale rate where the perception of exertion was, not a single one of them reported feeling like they're doing more than moderate levels of exercise. So what that means is, look another way, is that they were literally maxing out at what would be the equivalent of biking the Tour de France, and yet telling you that they felt like they were running on a treadmill, like lightly. In fact, we had at least one guy who got done doing it, and then he was like, afterwards was cooling down and stuff like that, we were chatting, and he was like, well, okay, I need to go to the gym now to get my workout in. because he just, his own, and that's a double-edged sword, by the way, right? Like you're trying to battle the perception of VR and exercise as being real exercise, which is a very real perception that we fight. If you put somebody in it and they really enjoy it, and this is a hypothesis we're testing, but I can't say for sure yet, but they play longer because they don't feel like they're exerting themselves as much as they otherwise would be, right? Just like pain management for burns and stuff like that, it's a lot of the same principle. It's not being aware of the discomfort. Like if somebody gets through it and then gets done, and even though they've burned all these calories, even though they've worked these muscle groups, they get done and say like, I just don't really feel like I exercise much. Like, what do you do with that?
Well, thanks to you, they know how many calories they burn.
That's the goal, right? But yeah, it's one of the things we found is at the gym there was this fellow that came in during one of the pilots, and he had tried VR before and thought it was great, and then had not used it for several weeks. And when I was there, this is in Columbus, Ohio, I ran into him again, and I was like, why? Would you like to try it again? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I asked him why he hadn't been using it, since he said it was awesome. He's like, that's amazing, I'd love to do this. And he's like, why haven't you been doing this? And he's like, well, to be honest, I come in, I swim, I love swimming, I'm not gonna do anything to do that. I swim for 30 minutes, and then I do 20 minutes of the cardiovascular, 20 minutes for the weightlifting, and then I go home, and if I added 20 minutes of VR, I'd hit rush hour traffic. And I was like, well, why don't you just take the 20 minutes of cardiovascular and replace it with 20 minutes of VR? And he was like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna do that. And he did. But it literally took somebody saying, this is the equivalent of that. You can take this thing that you think of as exercise and replace it with this thing that you think of as gaming, and it is good for you.
That's remarkable. Do we have any time for another question? Or does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, so if I could just put you all on the spot, maybe starting with Jamie, what do you look most forward to as far as fitness gaming goes from your perspective?
Well, I guess from our perspective at WayBetter, building out a platform that's very broad in terms of the types of behaviors we can help people with. So right now we're doing things that are nutrition and exercise sort of in the core, but I'd love to do things that can help people. This is beyond fitness world, but things like I'd like to learn Spanish, or I'd like to sleep more, or I'd like to manage my financial health better, and things like that. So can we gamify all kinds of behaviors? As long as we can quantify it and sort of bring people together to kind of play in the game, why can't we do what we're doing so successfully in a few areas, but across the board?
I think to me it's all about the candy is the exercise thing. It's about the types of exercise that will come where not only is there the AI perfected exercise nature, but where it watches my performance and helps me get to the places I want to without me being aware of it. But the point where I can do something that I inherently enjoy that makes me healthy, which for the most part traditional exercise has not done for me because I suck at it. So I think that's it.
I think for me, I'm just excited to get more creative. So at the moment, we're workshopping a lot more away from boxing. So different elements, whether I'm not going to talk about yet, but more things that I can use my dance background for, that I can use my athletic experience for. So I'm excited to create a whole space that it offers anything and everything you could want from a gym or an at-home working space or even like a mindful movement meditative area.
That's awesome. And if people want to find out more about the VR health rating system, you have really great cards designed that show the different areas of exercise. Where can they go to find?
Yeah, vrhealth.institute.
I would definitely recommend you check it out. It's super compelling to know that exists, and it might be applicable to what you do. So thank you, everybody. Really, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.